All right. So hello and welcome to the channel. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about this open source project that I've been working on. It's called Storywise. It's a open source project allowing you to embed a simple analytics tool onto your website. It makes it easy to track basically visitors coming to your website or to your web app. This project is open source. It has a few stars on GitHub, but I have bigger plans for it than this. The unique thing about this project is that it's really built to be as simple as possible. I have a little demo here that I can show quickly. So it has all the basics and nothing more, which is something I really love about this project. So you have here some sort of overview of how many unique visitors you've had to your website over time, right? Like how many visitors have you tracked on your website over time. You have some basic stats, some basic aggregated statistics about these visitors, how many page views in total, how many unique visitors and how many views per visitor have you had on average. Then you can come down and break down into top unique visitors per page and top page views per page, essentially. And you can drill into, the details if you're interested in that. And you have refers, so you can see where traffic has been referred to onto your website. Like if visitors are coming from Google or from YouTube or Instagram and so on. You can see what countries your visitors are coming from, and you can see what kind of devices your visitors are using. So is it what kind of browser is it, or what kind of operating system, device type, and device brand. You can kind of get a overview of the traffic coming to your website, and it's extremely simple to embed as well. It's as simple as basically putting this script onto your website, like with other similar analytics tools. And the nice thing about it is that you can self-host it. So you can take this entire little package and you can put it in your hosting of choice, essentially, and you can control everything that there is to control about it, which makes it incredibly useful for, let's say, small projects or for projects that really care about privacy. So it has quite a lot of nice things going about it. And obviously there's inspiration here that I've drawn from other projects such as Plausible, for example, or Fathom. But I really tried to make it much more focused on simplicity. It also has support for multiple databases. We can take a look at that in just a second, how that's being achieved in Storywise. So right now it supports Postgres, MongoDB, SQLite, and TimescaleDB. You're able to export and import your data, it's actually a work in progress. And it also respects your users' privacy, not just your privacy, but also your users' privacy, in the way that it doesn't actually track more information that it actually needs to. It gets inspiration from other projects like Plausible in this sense, and it really tries to be as unintrusive as possible for your users, which is very important. So without rambling too much about it, I want to show maybe a little bit about how this project is structured and how it works. I have the project cloned from GitHub. So the main GitHub page is over here, and I have the project cloned on my computer over here. There is some documentation attached to the public repository. There's some documentation pages here showing you how to get started with using Storywise. But of course, it can be improved. So it's something that I'll be working on in the future as the project continues to gain some more popularity. But anyways, I'm very interested in sharing a little bit about the technical aspects behind this project. So the project is structured in a mono repository. It has an API side, it has a front-end side, and it has a website as well. So I guess the website is the obvious one. This is the website. It has a few pages, including the documentation, contact, and so on, right? The website subproject is based on Nuxt. So it's based on the Vue app framework called Nuxt. I've very much enjoyed working with Nuxt for setting up this website. It's quite a refreshing experience after using React for the most part for the last few years. But it's a really nice and refreshing framework to set up web apps with. I very much enjoy working with Nuxt, at least for this project. But regardless, so that's the website, and then the API and front end are the interesting things. The API and front end are the parts of the project that are actually driving the product, basically story-wise. So what you see right here is being sourced from the API and front end. So I'll focus a little bit on going into details with that. So maybe first of all, the front end part of the project, it is similar to the website part. It's also based on Vue, not Nuxt, but just vanilla Vue.js. And I chose that because of its simplicity. I think Vue has a lot of really nice things going for it at this point, and it's a really nice and mature front-end framework. The project is also using Tailwind. So for the styling, for the styling part of the project, I'm using Tailwind heavily. This is one of the first brand new projects that I'm actually using Tailwind on, and I very much enjoyed working with Tailwind on this project as well. It's extremely useful. I would very much recommend Tailwind to anybody interested in doing any type of development. It's using the Vue router to route around multiple pages, and it has a little menu, and you can go inside of the views and you can look at the home view, for example, and you can see the sessions over time component, right? And you can see the stats, and you can see these table blocks, for example. So these table blocks over here, they're being built using this component, right? Yeah, so a very classic Vue.js type of project structure. And it's all very, very simple. It fetches data from the backend part, from the API part. And I guess the data layer is extremely simple as well. You fetch every single piece of data that you're interested in. Basically every single block in here, every single unit of data is split up into its own little API endpoint. And when you load the page, you also load the data. And depending on what kind of time range you select, these API endpoints will be called with a different time range parameter, right? Yeah, there's not much more to say about the front-end part. It's extremely simple. Vue.js with Tailwind. I very much enjoy using this little stack for a small application like this. Now to the backend part, which is a little bit more interesting. The API part is based on an Express application, a classic Express application, the most vanilla and boring web server that you can choose when writing an application with Node.js. Obviously, this application is, I forgot to mention, but it is written in Node.js for the backend. So it's again to stress on the simplicity side of it, where you have the same language on the front end and on the back end. So yeah, very simple Express app. And it has only a handful of endpoints so far. And then for the authentication, it has its own very simple basic authentication set up for it. I forgot to demo it, but for example, when you visit the website, it's going to prompt you using the standard browser authentication method, and you can provide a username and a password. For my website here, or the demo website, the username is admin, the password is 123. There we go. Right? And it doesn't use any fancy login framework or anything like that. It just uses username and password. What else? So if I dig into the handlers, into the request handlers, so let's say I go into this handler here, you'll see that it references something called a data repo. And this is where the multi-database support kicks in. So it exposes a set of generic methods that return the data in its expected structure. So it's a common approach when you deal with something like this, where your data persistence layer might actually be not so simply defined, or it might be that you have multiple data persistence layers and you want to be able to switch between them. So in this case, I have Mongo, Postgres, libSQL, which is SQLite, and TimescaleDB. So for data repositories, if you want to add your own, please contribute it to the main project, and I'll be happy to pull it into the repository. In order to implement this interface in order to implement this kind of contract. You can create a class out of this interface, and you can implement it. And then inside of this implementation, you can see all the details behind the scenes of fetching data from a particular database. So for Postgres, you have, if you want to get the session count by user agent, for example, you create a query like this. So you write some SQL where you select something, and then you count certain things, and then you count that from the relevant table in the database, and you have a where statement where you filter over time, and you group some data, and you order some data, and so on and so on. So you have all of these SQL queries written specifically for every single endpoint, right? Which is not so bad. It's actually really simple in the grand scheme of things. It's much more easy to write the dedicated SQL query than using an ORM that would supposedly not even be able to do something like this. And similar for MongoDB, right? For Mongo, you wouldn't have an SQL query, you would have an aggregation pipeline. So, use the Mongo query language essentially to achieve the same thing with the same kind of output, respecting the same contract across all the different repositories, right? One other interesting thing here in this project is that given that you have multiple databases to work with, you also want to create those databases or maintain those databases over time in a consistent way. So for that, there's a migrations section of the project, and the migrations are essentially the mechanism you can, first of all, create the database and then maintain the database by deploying changes over time in a way that it modifies the data or the database in a way that makes it compatible with the current version of the application, essentially. So obviously you're not going to get the data structure right 100% from the first try, and you're not going to think all the attributes in from the first try. So this is a mechanism that you can actually use to roll out changes over time as you're adding features. Yeah, so there's a little migration function for every single database, and every single database type has its own history of changes that have been deployed to it, right? So for the Postgres database, there's this type of SQL, and for MongoDB, you'll have the MongoDB type of change. You even have some actual JavaScript written for this. So multiple database support and migrations across multiple databases, which is pretty interesting. And then there's tests in this project as well. This is another way to ensure that the contract of the API is respected whenever changes are performed, which is really important as you're adding more features. I find that to be extremely useful to make sure that I don't break anything when I'm making a big change, or I'm adding a new repository or a new database type, let's say, or yeah. I use it to validate that my changes are working correctly all the time. What else? Obviously the project is using TypeScript. At this point, it's basically de facto in every new front-end or back-end project, although I know that some people have their preferences and use, for example, JavaScript with JS docs on top of it, as it happened with Svelte, or yeah, other people just don't use types at all whatsoever. My preference is always to use TypeScript. It helps me a lot to not shoot myself in the foot, and I prefer to use it even in small projects like this. The project can be run using, for example, Docker. I have a Docker image set up for both the API and the front end. There's a small build pipeline kind of baked into this as well. I have a small automated pipeline that takes care of building both the API and the website. So I can show you how that looks like over here. If I take maybe the latest commits, you can see kind of the flow of things that it does. So it splits into two parts, where you first build the website and push the website, and then on the other branch you build a core project, which is the this part of the project, right? You build that and you push it as well. What else? You can run it using Docker Compose, for example, right? And you can run it using Kubernetes as well. So you have an example here of how to do that. I prefer using Kubernetes whenever I get the chance. There's also a Helm chart associated with this, and there's a documentation page here somewhere. Let's have a look. Yes, so you can deploy Storywise using the Helm chart, for example. It's all kind of in the inception phase right now, and it doesn't have all the features in the Helm chart or in the Docker Compose side of things, but it should be able to support all the features that I just talked about, including multi-database support with Postgres or libsql or MongoDB. You can choose from whichever one you prefer. And you can, of course, deploy it on your own using various cloud services. If you happen to have a free tier, you don't have to use the Docker or the Kubernetes deployment. You can just roll your own. And it's as simple as essentially providing a database URL and a username and a password for your website. So your demo website will have a username and a password, and then behind the scenes it needs a database to connect to, and that's basically it. You can just get up and running with that very, very fast. When you're kind of ready to embed the analytics tool into your website, you can just go in here after you deployed it and copy this tracking script, and you can just drop that into your website header, and then it'll start recording traffic over time after that. I also happen to have a small cloud-based version of this in the making, so I'm gonna make a hosted solution or a hosted version of Storywise where you just pay for the hosting on a monthly basis, and then you can just get access to running Storywise on an infrastructure that is maintained by the official project. But for now, if you want to join the wait list, you're more than welcome to actually go to the website and sign up, and you'll get an email when it's ready. So that's about it. That's Storywise. That's how the project is structured. If you would like to see more content about this topic, let me know in the comments below, and I'll be happy to dig a little bit deeper into any of the areas that I kind of glimpsed over just now in this short video. But drop me a comment, and I'm looking forward to see you the next time.